Hi, my name is Arjun Chaudhary, and welcome to Energize, the Tech Revolution. My guest today is Geoffrey Cann, an international author and educator on the topic of digital innovation in the global oil and gas industry. Some of you might have read his first book, Bits, Bytes, and Barrels: The Digital Transformation of Oil and Gas, which is now being translated into Chinese. His latest book, Carbon Capital and the Cloud, a playbook for digital oil and gas, is a study of the leading practices for digital adoption in oil and gas and is available on Amazon, iTunes, and dozens of other sites. It's also being translated for the China market. He also records a weekly podcast and writes a weekly article about digital innovation in the industry. Welcome to the show, Geoffrey.
Oh, thank you so much for extending an invite to me to talk with you today. Much appreciated.
Absolutely, Geoffrey. So, Geoffrey, your professional journey has been fascinating. You started off as a program and analyst in Imperial Oil before
Yes.
moving into Deloitte, where you were almost for 25 years in various leadership positions before starting your entrepreneurship venture in authorship, speaking, and training.
Yes.
Could you share more about your professional journey, your entrepreneurship venture, and what made you start your own podcast show?
Well, the backstory is I first started my first working job was with an oil company, and that's what exposed me to the energy industry. Then I went back to school to do an MBA, and it's at that point that I joined Deloitte, which became my place of work for 30 years. During that time, I changed careers many times. You know, when you join professional services organizations, they don't stand still. So, I moved offices and changed practices. But my last posting, second to last posting, was with Deloitte in Australia, where I focused on the liquefied natural gas industry. And when I arrived there, my my wife said, "How is anybody in Australia going to find you? You're a partner in the firm; they don't know you." And I said, "Well, how else do you find anything these days?" She went to Google, and Google looked me up. And so she said, "Have you Googled yourself yet?" And that's where I realized that I hadn't. And when I looked up Google, the first Geoffrey Cann on the list was a convicted criminal. So it became imperative that I do what I could in the land of Google to reset my branding and my name so people could find me. That's what started the first podcast, actually. So I started that in 2013. So I've been publishing my podcast now for 11 years. First as focused on liquefied natural gas, and then focused more on digital innovation. It was when that tour of duty came to an end, I returned back to Canada, and I noted that there was a significant gap between the adoption of digital technologies in consumer and banking and retailing and versus oil and gas, which was quite slow, quite laggardly. And that created this window of opportunity to go focus on digital innovation in oil and gas. So I started doing that 7 years ago, and I've stayed there ever since. I left Deloitte 5 years ago and began to take my article series and turn that into business books. And I've published 3 so far, all on digital innovation in oil and gas. So if you like, that gives you kind of the backstory and the breadth of the journey that I've been on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Geoffrey. Now, the oil and gas industry is known to be a risk-averse industry which is slow to adopt technology. Now,
Yes.
is this a statement a fact or is it a myth? And if it's a fact, what's the reason for it?
It is a fact, as in as much as it's being studied. The best study came from McKinsey several years ago, who compared the pace of digital adoption in a variety of industrial segments and flagged oil and gas as being very, very laggardly. A more recent study was by Cisco, who published a survey of industrial settings and their adoption rate of digital innovation. Cisco, of course, sells digital technology platforms, and so it's not surprising they looked at those sectors. And oil and gas was of the, I think, 12 or 13 sectors they looked at, oil and gas was second to the last in terms of pace of adoption. And that book would have come out just before the pandemic. I've been told by cloud computing companies, this is an example, is that 60% of oil and gas companies only started to use cloud computing as a platform in 2020, after the pandemic got started. The pandemic forced oil and gas companies to start to really rethink their adoption of digital. So I think it is not a myth, it is a fact. I think there's been a significant turning point with the pandemic because the old ways of doing work simply couldn't survive in that context, and therefore changes needed to be made. But I think it's also fair to say the industry is still has a high tolerance for risk in some aspects of its business, and then a very low tolerance for risk in others. And the high tolerance for risk was in the exploration and of oil and gas resources, and relatively low risk tolerance elsewhere. And that's, I believe this is because the industry conserves its risk exposure, its appetite for risk, to that part of its business where it can make the most amount of money if it pays off. And that's in exploration and production. It's not in improving the different aspects of the business using digital.
Thank you for sharing that, Geoffrey. So, when you were in your days in Deloitte, trying to focus on digital transformation in the oil and gas, what gave you the belief and motivation that you would be able to bring a shift or digital transformation in this predominantly risk-averse oil and gas industry?
Well, I think that's a strong statement, and I'm not sure I don't believe that I singularly could drive an industrial scale change. But it was my belief at the time that there was a need for a voice in the landscape of voices talking about innovation in digital and oil and gas. There was room in the market for a voice that was independent of the industry, in other words, not working in oil and gas, but deeply knowledgeable about the industry, so that you could speak to truth about what's going on in the industry. And so that space in the market is what created the pathway, if you like, the place for me to go and do what I do.
Thank you for sharing that, Geoffrey. Now, from your days in Deloitte when you were working in the digital oil and gas space to this present moment, what have been the most dramatic innovations that you have seen taken place in the oil and gas industry?
Well, surprisingly, the industry's, although it might not appear to be so to an outsider, the industry is actually highly innovative and embraces certain kinds of changes quite quickly and others quite slowly. In the biggest changes that I've noted in my past many years working in the industry have been if you go back to the turn of the century, so 1998, 1999, there was a major wave of innovation that the industry went through to deal with a wave of mergers that actually took place then. ExxonMobil was created, Chevron Texaco, BP Amoco, all were formed at that time. And the industry adopted enterprise management tools with enthusiasm. That was a major change for the industry. So that was one big one. A second big one relates to the discovery of the improvements in horizontal drilling, where we can take a drill bit and bend it underground so that it goes horizontally, not just vertically, and hydraulic fracking, multi-stage hydraulic fracking, which allows a oil and gas producer to drill instead of horizontally through a reservoir, and then access the hydrocarbons in that reservoir at multiple points along the drill string. The combination of these two technologies has unlocked, turned the United States, as one example, from a net importer of oil and gas to one of the world's largest exporters of oil and gas. So that's a huge innovation change. A third one has been the oil sands in Canada. These are huge deposits, and the ability to exploit these deposits and extract the resource takes an enormous amount of innovation. Not just mining, but the steam-assisted gravity drainage technologies that are in use have unlocked an enormous amount of resource. These innovations, once they were sorted out, moved very, very quickly through the industry. The oil sands has lots of companies producing oil through steam-assisted gravity drainage and hydraulic fracking and multi-stage horizontal drilling has produced all kinds of new companies in the United States. So anyway, there's three big ones. We could talk at other versions of that, but think about it at an industrial scale. Those are the biggest ones.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeffrey. Now, looking forward into the future, where do
Mm.
you see the biggest scope for innovation in the oil and gas industry? Do you see it in the upstream, midstream, downstream? What type of innovations? And also, how do you see AI playing a role and what challenges would operators, oil and gas operators would encounter in this process? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a very big question because it's a very big industry. The opportunity, all things being equal, the oil and gas industry would continue doing exactly what it's doing today for the foreseeable future. The demand for hydrocarbons is, although we like to think that it's flat or declining, the reality is it continues to grow globally. There are significant warning signs on the horizon, though. China, which have historically been the largest buyer of fossil fuels over the past 10 years, have bent the curve, as they would say, in China mainland. The demand for gasoline for cars peaked last year, 2023. So it's only set to go down at this stage. And what's driving that is electric vehicles and electric buses and electric construction equipment, electric heavy haulers. So major change in the demand for fossil fuels. This will drive and force change into the rest of the industry, because the reality is we have, if we don't have a growth market, China, but we have a stable production, all things considered, the supply should start to outstrip the demand. And when that happens, all those companies that are not particularly efficient are going to have to become very efficient very quickly. Those that are already presently on the path to becoming exceptionally efficient for the future will survive. So my sense is there's a shakeout coming here. And so this is going to drive a considerable amount of change coming into the industry. It will start, and you will feel it most, beginning with the upstream, because once we get into excessive supply and not enough demand, you start to really see contraction in the industry. The services companies that sell into the industry will feel it first, because there will be pullback in the demand for services. The existing infrastructure, which we move product around through wholesale channels and the like, unlikely to feel a lot of change. They tend to be fairly stable, actually. And then the part of the industry that may experience the biggest change, but not quickly, will be in the retail sector, because if we move away from gasoline powered cars to electric cars, what's the point of a gasoline station? Good question. That's no longer a growth industry. So suffice to say, the biggest changes coming are hard to predict, but you can start to see the main drivers of them now emerging on the horizon.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeffrey. Now, shifting our conversation to a career perspective, for somebody who's looking to develop a career in the digital oil and gas space,
Yeah.
what sort of current functional roles exist in the digital oil and gas space for these individuals? And what sort of skill sets, industry conferences, certifications would you recommend they build upon and attend?
So the skills are really very hard to pin down at this stage, and the reason is that the technologies are moving exceptionally quickly. These generation artificial intelligence tools are moving very fast, and so even where just a couple of years ago I would have said, if you're an engineer in the petroleum sciences, if you had a little bit of exposure to programming tools, you're probably fine. But now I'm no longer confident in that. And the reason is that those tools are now moving so quickly. They're taking on lots of really important and powerful roles and jobs and tasks that have to be done in the industry. So it's getting very, very tricky. I would say that there's absolutely going to be a permanent demand for people who know how to maintain these tools and keep them current. So that sort of sustainment function. I think anyone whose job today is not using these newer tools is at some risk because these tools are starting to enter into virtually every aspect of the industry, artificial intelligence tools in particular. If you're an engineer and you're involved in designing and drawing and doing plant-related work, these tools are slowly eating from the bottom up. They're eating P&ID development and the like at a crazy pace. So it's quite tricky at this stage to predict, what the future is actually going to look like. I think the changing government in the United States, the Trump administration, is forecasted to undo much of the climate-related changes that previous administrations have put into effect. But I would certainly look to the Inflation Reduction Act as a clue as to where people should take their careers. The Inflation Reduction Act is putting money into clean tech, clean energy, carbon capture and storage, thermal energy, renewables of all kinds, circular economy thinking, waste reduction. Those are where the careers of the future are going to be. Now, how do you get smart in those careers? Well, as it turns out, oil and gas professionals are actually quite risk averse, and they won't change careers that quickly or easily. So, if you're interested in these future careers and you have an appetite for it, this is a very good time to start to shift your career in those directions because there's very little competition for people with those skills to work in carbon capture, geothermal, and like hydrogen manufacturing. It's just as an example. So now, where do you get the certifications and the like? Good question. Every place will have a different set of institutions for you to go and prosecute. I know in Canada, there's just 2 or 3 universities that teach this stuff, and they offer night school courses and exposure and the like.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. So that nicely leads us to our next question, which is you, along with Mr. Philip Black, have co-created a course called Engineer Your Career Pivot. Could you share more about the course? Where can we find it? And what was the inspiration behind creating this course?
So Engineer Career Pivot came about because Philip, who is a professional engineer working in oil and gas, was watching just before the pandemic and then through the pandemic, the rise of these digital tools coming into the industry. And he wanted to work in these fields. But what he discovered was that when he, as a professional engineer in oil and gas, went to a renewable energy company or a hydrogen manufacturer or a carbon capture and storage company, they would look at his oil and gas background and dismiss it as being not entirely relevant to these new energy fields. The consequence of this was really, really good industry professionals in energy who know how to do this safely and economically were being systematically overlooked for roles in the new energy economy. And he and I were really upset about this because it means that a whole lot of really good professionals are going to be shunted aside and not given great opportunities at precisely the point when we need them the most, and we're going to go through energy transition. And so that's what created the impetus for us to create the course. We were upset that people were being turned down for really good jobs, and it was just heartbreaking that all of this incredible capability would simply be discarded by new energy companies. So we set out to solve that, and our solution was Engineer Career Pivot. So those 3 words, and if you go into online, just type in Engineer Career Pivot, all as one word, but 3 words, you'll find the website. What we did was we looked at the way that an engineer would apply their engineering mind to the problem of changing careers. And so we crafted a training course that is highly targeted at oil and gas professionals and talks their language and is very systematic, very mathematical, and very linear to help them revisualize their careers outside of oil and gas. And people who take it find themselves able to secure roles now in these new emerging fields, and then, if you like, reposition their careers for the next wave of energy, which is newer, cleaner energies coming at us.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Now, just to give a sneak peek into your course for our viewers and listeners, could you share what would be like the top three transferable skill sets for somebody who's looking to transition from oil and gas to the clean energy space?
Well, there's several that are really, in terms of technical skills, that apply from one to the other. What is powerful about engineers? Well, they're very, very process oriented and systematic in their thinking. That capability and technical know-how, that the mindset of thinking like that applies regardless of what energy product you're talking about. I, for one, would value a oil and gas professional who knows all about handling methane and produced gases and the like. I would trust that individual to be able to sort through all the challenges of dealing with hydrogen.
Thank
Right. So yeah, so there's technical skills, that sort of process thinking. Second is problem solving. Engineers are exceptionally good at problem solving. That's what they spend their careers at. And these new energy fields are going to be replete with problems to be solved. And then third is that engineers who are working in oil and gas have an enormous safety and compliance mindset. This is embedded into how we think about oil and gas, is to make it safe. And that same requirement is going to exist in new energy as it does in oil and gas energy products. So those are capabilities and skills that migrate completely over from one industry to the next. The challenge we see with most engineers, however, is when they talk about oil and gas, they'll often go deep into some specific nuanced area of oil and gas, and the customer who's on the other end thinking about a different energy product is like, I don't understand how this is even relevant. So what we do is we help the engineers reframe and reposition what they say to whom and how they message their capabilities so that the audience they're trying to appeal to can hear the story correctly.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeffrey. So that concludes the formal portion of our interview for today. We like to end our podcast with a fun segment called a rapid fire, where our viewers and listeners get to learn a little bit more about the personal side of our guests. So as part of this rapid fire, I'll be asking you three quick questions. Are you ready?
I guess I am. Fire away.
Great, Jeffrey. Thank you. So, firstly, as this is a tech podcast, would love to learn what's your favorite app or a hardware product that you enjoy using?
Oh, wow. So that'd be really hard to answer. I think my favorite hardware product is the Blackmagic switcher technology, which I use in my studio for camera switching. It's incredibly powerful. Probably my favorite app, which I use on an almost daily basis, would be a product called Bear, and it's an editing tool for creating content.
Great, Jeffrey. Secondly, what's been a book that you have read that has had a big impact on your life and why?
Big impact on my life. Probably there's The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I know a number of people will talk about that, but I view that book, even though it's about warfare and thinking, it has a lot of good life lessons in it for thinking about life and situations that you find yourself in. So Sun Tzu. That's another business book which has had a big impact was Jesus CEO. Now, I'm not a particularly religious person, but this book was was really fascinating to me. It was it described how how did someone who had no technology, walked around as a shepherd, manage to recast time based on when he wandered around. It's like pretty powerful. So it's all of his life lessons is in that book. So there's two.
Interesting. Thank you. And lastly, do you have any final words of wisdom, perhaps a short story or a quote that you'd like to share with the members of our audience?
Oh, I'm full of little lessons and things that I pass on to people. No, one would be if you have rich parents, don't upset them. Uh, so don't do that. Number two, take a distant view of things right in front of you, and take an up close view of things that are far away. I found that to be very, very handy. And the third one would be just my own invention was food, fitness, finance, the three F's. A lot of us, as we get older, we make more money, but we don't know how to manage it correctly. Because when you make a lot of money, you really need to think about finance differently. We tend to sacrifice fitness for other things, which is not good. And we don't really pay too much attention to what we eat. And so food. And so food, fitness, finance is just my way of reminding myself to keep these things in balance and pay attention to them because they play such an important role in our futures.
And thank you so much, Jeffrey. So that concludes our podcast and our interview for today. How can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
Oh, it's very easily. Just visit my website, geoffreycann.com. That's GeoffreyCann, geoffreycann.com. There's a contact tab there. Just click that. You can drop me a note. Can email me as well. My phone number is on the website. I'm very easy to reach.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure having you. And thank you so much for sharing your subject matter expertise in digital oil and gas. From the team at Energize, wishing you and your organization lots of growth and lots of success.
Thank you so much. And I wish the same for you as we run into the end of 2024 and into 2025.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, our episode for today. And remember, you're one product away from transformation. I'm Arjun Chaudhary.